My apartment is a graveyard of unplayed vinyl. Stacks of pristine, heavyweight reissues lean against the white walls, their spines unbroken, their grooves untouched by a diamond tip. I don't own a turntable. I never have. Every album in that growing tower is just a physical receipt for a conversation I was too terrified to finish. A heavy, cardboard monument to a desire I haven't found the voice for yet. I checked my watch. 4:15 p.m. The air outside smelled of exhaust and wet pavement, but I knew what waited inside. My pulse hammered a frantic, uneven rhythm against my collarbone, a drumbeat of anticipation. I pushed the door open, stepping out of the reality of the street and into the fiction I'd built for myself. The air inside the resonant frequency smells of ozone, degrading paper, and the specific warm dust that settles on things that are loved but rarely moved. It's a distinct ecosystem, lit in amber, where the only sound is the rhythmic thwip, thwip, thwip of fingers walking through crates and the low hum of a vintage tube amplifier. Samira was behind the high counter, head bent over a new arrival. Today, her dark curls were escaping the clip, falling over her forehead in a way that made my fingers itch. She wore a charcoal work shirt, sleeves rolled up past her elbows, revealing forearms dusted with the faint gray residue of old paper sleeves. I shifted my bag on my shoulder. I spend my days in a hermetically sealed studio, digitally scrubbing hiss and pop out of old archival recordings. I erase the noise of history until it's sterile. The irony isn't lost on me. I spend 8 hours a day removing static, only to come here and crave the crackle. I come here to watch her hands. She was cleaning a record, a first pressing of something jazz-heavy. It's a terrifyingly attractive thing. Competence. The way she handled the vinyl was a masterclass in controlled intimacy, holding the disc by the edges with a casual authority that made my breath catch. She sprayed the cleaning fluid, then used a velvet brush to sweep the dust away. Her movements were fluid, economic, just a rhythmic, circular motion that followed the track of the needle. I found myself wondering what those hands would feel like if they weren't holding a record, if they were holding me. I pulled a random album from the crate, something with a geometric cover, just to have something in my hands. The cardboard creaked slightly. Samira stopped. She didn't look up immediately, but her posture changed. The easy motion froze. She slowly raised her head, her dark eyes finding me across the rows of jazz and blues. The recognition was instant, a physical tether snapping into place. Walking the length of the aisle felt like crossing a stage. I held the album against my chest like a shield, a flimsy barrier between my racing heart and her attentive silence. This was the routine we had perfected over 6 months. I browse for music I can't play, and we meet at the register to trade currency for a few minutes of shared air. I placed the record on the counter. It was an obscure 80s synth-pop compilation I would never listen to. It sat there between us, the neon cover art suddenly looking ridiculous. Samira didn't just ring things up, she curated the exit. She reached out, tapping a silent rhythm against the cardboard before sliding the album toward her. A slow, deliberate drag that sounded like sandpaper on silk. "A bold choice for a Tuesday," she said. Her voice was low, textured, a sound that seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my chest cavity. It had the quality of a needle finding the groove, scratchy, warm, and incredibly specific. She didn't look up from the cover art immediately. She let the comment hang there, suspended in the dust motes dancing between us. "I needed something structural," I lied, my voice sounding too thin, too breathless in the heavy atmosphere. "Something with edges." "Edges," she repeated, tasting the word. She finally looked up. The impact of her gaze was physical, a sudden increase in gravity. Her eyes were dark, framed by those heavy lashes, and they held a look that was both amused and intensely analytical. "It's aggressive," she noted, tapping the neon triangle. "Lots of sharp angles. Are you feeling sharp today?" "I'm feeling—" I trailed off. I was feeling exposed. I was feeling the heat rising up my neck, a flushed betrayal of my composure. "I'm feeling like I need a change of pace." She hummed, a low vibration in her throat, and turned to the register. The machine was an ancient, mechanical beast that required force to operate. She punched the keys with that same fluid competence, her movements precise and practiced. The drawer popped open with a metallic ching that echoed in the small space. "That'll be 22, she said. I reached for my wallet, my hands trembling slightly. I hated that tremor. It was a tell, a signal flare of how much she affected me. I pulled out a bill and held it out. This was the climax of the ritual, the handover. She didn't just take the money, she reached for it. And for a fraction of a second, a moment that stretched and warped like a slow-motion film reel, her fingers brushed mine. Her skin was cool, rough with dust, contrasting sharply with the heat of my palm. She didn't pull back immediately. She let her fingers linger, a ghost of a touch that sent a shockwave traveling up my arm. The silence that followed was coiled, dense with everything we weren't saying. I stood there, paralyzed by the sensation, while the hum of the amplifier seemed to grow louder. "Receipt?" she asked, her voice dropping an octave. "No," I managed. "No receipt." She slid the record into a paper bag, folding the top over with a sharp crease. But she didn't hand it over yet. She rested her hands on the package, leaning forward. Her gaze was unflinching, pinning me in place. "See you tomorrow?" she asked. It wasn't a question. It was a challenge. "Tomorrow," I confirmed, the word feeling like a vow. I took the bag, the weight of it distinct and heavy, and turned away, breaking the connection with a physical effort that felt like wading through water. Wednesday arrived with a gray humidity. I walked in, but this time I didn't turn left toward the New Wave section. I walked straight to the counter, my hands empty. Samira looked up, her hand reaching for the register. When she saw the empty counter, she froze. "You're empty-handed," she observed, her voice cautious. "Did the inventory finally disappoint you?" "No," I said, leaning against the counter. "I stopped trusting my own judgment. I keep buying things with sharp edges, and they don't fit anymore." "And?" She tilted her head. "And I want to know what you would pick." For me, the silence was the sound of a door unlocking. Her smirk softened into something that looked terrifyingly like curiosity. "You want me to curate you," she said softly. "I want to hear what you hear. Stay there." She moved. For months, the counter had been our Berlin Wall, a necessary fortification. But then she reached down and unlatched the swing gate. The metallic click echoed. She pushed it open and stepped out. The barrier was gone. She wasn't a portrait framed by shelving anymore. She was a reality standing in my space. She moved toward the soul section, sliding past me in the narrow gap. The air displaced by her movement hit me like a wave. I smelled her properly for the first time. Warm sandalwood, the dry scent of aging paper, and something bright like bergamot. As she passed, her arm brushed against my sleeve, a microscopic friction that lit my nerves like a live wire. She stopped at the crates, her back to me for a moment. I took a breath, trying to steady the sudden spike in my heart rate. She began to flip through the albums. Thwip, thwip, thwip. The rhythm was faster now, decisive. I watched her shoulders move, the focus in her posture absolute. She wasn't just looking for a record. She was looking for a specific emotion she wanted to hand to me. "You buy armor," she said, not looking back, her fingers dancing over the cardboard sleeves. "Synth pop, industrial, cold wave. You buy things that keep people out. Maybe I need protection, I murmured, stepping closer. I was drawn into her orbit, unable to keep the distance. Maybe, she countered. Or maybe you just need someone to find the soft spot. She pulled a worn soul record from the early 70s. She turned to face me, holding the album against her chest. This isn't structural. It has no edges. It's messy and it hurts, but it's real. I don't have a turntable, I started to say. I know, she interrupted. That's why we're going to listen to it here. She gestured toward the glass-walled listening booth. Trust me? Yes, I breathed. The booth was a relic of scratched plexiglass and yellowed acoustic foam, a phone booth-sized confession box. When Samira stepped in and the door clicked shut, the silence was absolute. The space was so narrow that she had to press her back against the foam wall while I leaned against the glass, our knees inches apart. She slid the record from its sleeve and placed it on the platter. Headphones, she murmured. I put them on. Samira didn't. She simply dropped the needle. First came the warm crackle of dust, then a bass line, low, slow, and dirty. A woman's voice poured into my ears, singing about the terrifying slide into wanting someone you shouldn't. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, Samira was watching me. She wasn't listening to the music. She was listening to me. Her arms were crossed, her head tilted, studying my reaction with a focus that felt like a physical touch. She watched my breathing shift to match the tempo. It was a sultry interrogation without a single word spoken. The air in the booth grew heavy. I felt pinned by her gaze. The music swelled, and I saw Samira's eyes drop to my mouth. She uncrossed her arms and reached out. For a second, I thought she was going to touch my face, but her hand drifted past my cheek and landed on the amplifier knob behind me. She turned the volume up. To do it, she had to lean in, her body entering my space completely. Her forearm brushed against my chest, a solid warmth. She stayed there, leaning across me, her face inches from my neck. I was trapped between the glass wall and her body, sutured together by the music. Time seemed to warp. The song could have lasted 3 minutes or 3 hours. I was conscious only of the bass line thumping in my ears and the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of her chest, just inches from mine. The desire was a physical ache, a tightness in the center of my chest that demanded release. Then, the track ended. The music cut out, replaced by the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of the needle hitting the runout groove. The spell shattered. Samira pulled back, the distance reasserting itself like a cold draft. She lifted the tone arm, the mechanical click sounding violent in the sudden silence. Well? She asked, her voice sounding muffled through the headphones I was still wearing. I pulled them off, my hands shaking. I felt unmoored, dizzy, as if I'd just stepped off a spinning ride. I swallowed, trying to find my voice. I've never heard that before. It's a rare pressing, she said, her voice composed, though her eyes were still dark, still hungry. Not many people know how to listen to it. I'll take it, I said. The words were a reflex. I didn't even own a turntable. But I knew I couldn't leave that booth without taking a piece of the moment with me. I know you will, she whispered. The intimacy of the listening booth felt like a hallucination by Saturday afternoon. The weekend crowd had descended upon the resonant frequency, transforming my sanctuary into a transit hub. The hushed reverence was gone, replaced by the wet slap of raincoats, the shrill ring of door chimes, and the chaotic murmur of a dozen conversations competing for airspace. The shop smelled different. The delicate scent of old paper and Samira's sandalwood was buried under the damp wool of strangers and the aggressive musk of cheap cologne. I had been exiled to the far corner, huddled near the folk section with a book I wasn't reading, watching the ecosystem collapse. It was a physical discomfort, seeing so many bodies in a space that felt like it belonged to us. I watched hands, careless, uneducated hands, flipping through the crates with a speed that made me wince. They treated the vinyl like product, like dead plastic, oblivious to the ritual. Then, he walked in. He was the archetype of the vinyl purist, a man who wore his knowledge like a weapon and his pretension like a suit of armor. He didn't browse. He marched straight to the counter, bypassing the line of tourists, and leaned his elbow on the wood, right where my hand had rested days before. He was encroaching on holy ground. He held a Japanese pressing of a Rolling Stones album, waving it around as he spoke to Samira. I couldn't hear his words at first, but I saw the posture, the man-spreading of the ego. He was leaning in too close, invading the workspace, performing his expertise for an audience he assumed was captivated. My reaction was visceral, a sharp flare of territorial jealousy. Seeing him consume her time felt like a theft. I gripped my book, wanting to physically remove his elbow from the counter. I watched Samira. Her expression was a masterclass in professional detachment. He was lecturing her, explaining her own inventory. Actually, his voice rose, you've overpriced this. The 1979 reissue doesn't have the same dynamic range. It's a common mistake for smaller shops. Samira didn't stiffen. She relaxed. It was the relaxation of a predator. She placed both hands on the counter, leaning in. If you check the dead wax, she said, her voice cutting through the noise, you'll see the matrix number ends in a 1A. This was pressed at the Monarch plant using the original metal parts from the UK master. She tapped the sleeve. It's not a mistake. It's an education. And frankly, I'm practically giving it away to anyone who actually knows how to listen. The man froze. He paid without another word. As he turned to leave, Samira looked up, scanning the room until her eyes locked onto mine. The mask dissolved. She gave me a microscopic roll of her eyes and a quick, conspiratorial quirk of her lips. Can you believe this? In that crowded room, the distance between us collapsed. We were conspirators, sharing a private frequency. The weather turned with the sudden, violent temper of a lover scorned. The bruised purple sky didn't just open, it collapsed. One moment, the street outside was a gray, manageable drizzle. And the next, it was a blurred, impressionistic painting of rushing water and neon smears. The rain assaulted the pavement, a relentless, drumming roar that drowned out the city's usual mechanical hum. It was cinematic in its aggression, the kind of downpour that sends a primal signal to the brain: seek shelter, hide. Inside the resonant frequency, the atmosphere compressed instantly. The air pressure dropped, and the shop transformed into a capsule, a watertight vessel sealed off from the drowning world. It felt safer, warmer, and infinitely more intimate, like we were the last two survivors on a very comfortable life raft, drifting through a dark ocean. The exodus was swift. Humans have a frantic, panicked reaction to sudden storms. They scatter. The couple by the jazz bins grabbed their tote bags and ran for the subway entrance down the block. The tourists near the window looked at the sky with horror and bolted, the bell above the door chiming a frantic, erratic rhythm as they fled. Within 5 minutes, the damp footprints on the floorboards were fading into the wood, and the shop was empty. Well, almost empty. I hadn't moved. I sat in my exile in the corner, my book forgotten on my lap, watching the rain lash against the plate glass. I had no umbrella, and honestly, I had no desire to leave. The world outside was cold, chaotic, and wet. The world inside smelled of vinyl and felt like a promise. I watched the ecosystem of the shop settle into a new, heavy stillness. The silence that followed the rush was profound, filled only by the rhythmic hammering of the rain and the low, steady hum of the tube amps. I watched Samira move through the closing routine, a dance I had never seen fully until now. She swept the floor near the entrance, her movements rhythmic and calm, completely at odds with the storm raging 3 feet away. She wiped down the counter where the intruder had leaned, erasing his presence with a few sharp swipes of a cloth. Then, she walked to the front door. She stood there for a moment, her back to me, looking out at the deluge. Her silhouette was framed by the gray, watery light, a dark shape against the chaos. Then came the sound. It was sharp, mechanical, and final. Click. I looked up, my breath catching in my throat. She had turned the deadbolt. She hadn't just closed the door, she had locked it. With a slow, deliberate motion, she reached up and flipped the sign hanging in the glass. The cheerful "open" disappeared, replaced by the stark, white-on-black finality of closed. She didn't unlock it for me. She didn't turn around and say, "Okay, time to go." She didn't acknowledge that I was still sitting there, a stowaway in her vessel. Then, the lighting changed. She reached for the panel by the door and killed the main overheads. The harsh, retail-appropriate track lighting died instantly. The sudden darkness was jarring for a split second, until my eyes adjusted to the new reality. The shop was now lit only by the warm amber glow of the accent lamps in the corners, and the soft electric buzz of the neon "now spinning" sign on the back wall. The space transformed. The shadows lengthened, stretching across the floorboards like reaching fingers. The corners disappeared into darkness, and the space between us seemed to shrink, the room narrowing down to just the two of us. The rain outside became a dark, moving wall, isolating us completely. It was just Samira and me, suspended in the half-light, the air thick with the smell of ozone and the undeniable, heavy weight of opportunity. "Looks like the city is underwater," she said. Her voice carried easily in the empty room, stripped of the usual background noise. It was softer now, pitched for a private audience. "I think I missed my window," I replied, my voice sounding too loud in my own ears. I gestured toward the glass, where the water was running in sheets, distorting the streetlights into long, bleeding ribbons of color. "You never had a window," she said, walking slowly back toward the counter. She moved with a different energy now. The professional urgency was gone, replaced by a languid, cat-like grace. "This storm has been building all afternoon. You just chose to ignore it." "Maybe I like the view," I countered, closing my book. "Maybe you do." She leaned against the counter, crossing her arms over her chest. The barrier was still there, but it felt different now. The commercial context had evaporated. I wasn't a customer anymore. She wasn't a merchant. We were just two women trapped in a box of glass and wood. "You're stuck," she observed, though there was no pity in her tone. It sounded more like an invitation. Her eyes caught the reflection of the neon sign, turning the irises into pools of dark, electric red. "I'm not complaining," I said, standing up. The legs of my chair scraped against the floor, a harsh sound that seemed to echo. "It's better than being out there." "Is it?" She reached under the counter, her movements hidden in the shadow. Most people panic when they get locked in somewhere. They feel trapped. "I don't feel trapped," I said, holding her gaze across the dim room. I took a step toward her, drawn by the gravity she generated. "I feel secured." A corner of her mouth lifted, that dangerous, knowing smirk returning. "Careful," she murmured. "That sounds like trust." "Is that dangerous?" "In this weather?" She laughed, a low sound that vibrated in the small space between us. "Everything is dangerous in this weather. The lines get blurred." She pushed off the counter, standing straight. "I'm going to the back," she said, gesturing to the heavy velvet curtain that separated the shop floor from the storage area, the staff-only sanctum I had never seen. "The acoustics are better back there." And I have something that needs to be heard. She paused, her hand on the curtain, looking back at me. The invitation hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. You can stay here in the dark, she said softly. Or you can come behind the velvet rope. I pushed the heavy velvet aside and stepped through. The transition was as sharp as walking from a freezer into a sauna. The front of the shop was all curated atmosphere, cool air, carefully angled lighting, and the dry, intellectual scent of dust. But back here was the engine room. It was warmer, the air dense and uncirculated, smelling of stale coffee, the chemical tang of packing tape, and, overwhelmingly, of her. It was the scent I had caught only in fragments when she leaned over the counter, now concentrated into a physical presence. Sandalwood, that sharp citrus zest, and the underlying warmth of skin musk. It filled my lungs, dizzying and immediate. Welcome to the other side, she said. Her voice sounded different here, less projected, stripped of the professional resonance she used for the sales floor. It was softer, rougher around the edges. I looked around. If the front of the shop was a gallery, this was the artist's studio, the messy, chaotic truth behind the performance. Cardboard boxes were stacked in precarious towers that reached the tin ceiling. Invoices were scattered across a scarred wooden desk like fallen leaves. A half-eaten sandwich sat on a paper plate next to a stack of unpriced 45s, and a charcoal cardigan was draped over the back of a folding chair, the sleeves hanging down like empty arms. It felt incredibly intimate, almost voyeuristic. I was seeing the unpolished reality of her days. I was seeing the space where she stopped being the proprietor and just existed as a woman who got cold, who ate lunch in a hurry, who let things get messy. It's a disaster, she said, watching me track the chaos. She didn't sound apologetic. She sounded amused. It's real, I countered, running my hand along the edge of a shelving unit made of raw, unfinished pine. The front is a stage set. This is where the work happens. This is where I hide, she corrected. She squeezed past me to get to the far wall. The space between the shelving units was narrow, barely wide enough for one person, let alone two. As she moved, she had to turn sideways. Her hip brushed against my thigh, a slow, deliberate friction that sent a jolt of static straight to my spine. She didn't pull away. She let the contact linger for a second longer than necessary before slipping into the shadows of the stacks. I've been holding something back here, she said, her voice floating from the end of the aisle. I almost put it out on the floor 3 times, but I couldn't. She returned a moment later, holding a record. It wasn't in a protective plastic sleeve. It was raw, the cover art matte and textured. She held it out to me, but she didn't let go when I reached for it. For a moment, we were both holding it, connected by the cardboard square. Take a look, she whispered. I tilted it into the light. It was an ambient album from the late 80s, something obscure and difficult. A landscape of drone sounds and silence. It was the kind of record you listened to when you wanted to disappear. You saved this for me? I asked, looking up. We were standing in the narrow gap between the shelves, trapped by the inventory. The tension was coiled tight, a physical pressure in the small space. I saved it because it's a test, she murmured, stepping closer. She was so close now that I had to tilt my head back to meet her eyes. Most people listen to the melody. I've watched you. You listen to the silence between the tracks. You wait for the breath before the singer starts. This album is all breath. My heart hammered against my ribs. She hadn't just been ringing up my purchases, she had been analyzing my soul. She had dismantled me from across the counter, cataloging my loneliness and my need for quiet. And she had saved a piece of music that proved it. I don't know what to say, I breathed. Don't say anything, she said. Her gaze dropped, tracing the line of my throat, then flicked back up. The playfulness was gone. In the dim light of the back room, she looked unguarded, raw. Just tell me I was right. You were right, I admitted. About all of it. The rain hammered on the flat roof above us, a loud, metallic drumming that was different from the sound on the glass out front. It felt closer here, more oppressive. Samira flinched slightly at a particularly loud gust, her shoulders tightening. I hate this season, she confessed suddenly, her voice dropping to a whisper. She leaned back against the shelving unit, the wood creaking under her weight. The rain, it locks everything down. It makes the shop feel too big. When it storms like this, I feel like I'm the only person left in the city. You're not alone now, I said. The words hung in the warm, dusty air. No, she agreed, her eyes locking onto mine, dark and unflinching. I'm not. The air in the narrow aisle shifted. The vulnerability that had just opened up between us, the shared confession of loneliness, suddenly hardened into something sharper. Samira didn't move away. Instead, she shifted her weight, planting her feet more potentially firmly on the concrete floor, effectively blocking the only exit from the stacks. The intimacy was still there, but the temperature had changed. It wasn't comforting anymore. It was combustible. She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly as she studied my face. It was that same look she used when inspecting a scratch on a rare LP, forensic, unforgiving, and deeply curious. I have a question, she said. Her voice was deceptively light, but I could hear the trap snapping shut beneath the words. Anything, I answered. And I realized with a jolt that I meant it. In this back room, surrounded by the smell of her perfume and old cardboard, I would have told her my social security number if she asked in that low, smoky register. You don't own a turntable, do you? The question hit me like a physical blow to the chest. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the casual confidence of someone who has already read the last page of the book. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. The lie I had been constructing for 6 months, the persona of the audiophile, the collector, the connoisseur of obscure wave and industrial noise, evaporated instantly. I felt my face flame, a heat that started at my collarbone and burned all the way to my hairline. I stammered, looking for an exit, but there was only Samira, and she was an immovable object. Don't lie to me, she warned, her voice dropping to a whisper. She took a half step closer, invading my personal space until I was pressed back against the rough pine of the shelves. Not back here. Out there, you can pretend. Back here, we tell the truth. I exhaled, a long, shaky breath that felt like a surrender. No, I admitted. The word hung in the dusty air, stripped of all pretense. I don't even have speakers. My apartment is silent. She didn't look surprised. If anything, a look of satisfaction settled over her features. A cat that had just confirmed the mouse was exactly where she thought it was. I knew it, she murmured. She reached out, her hand hovering near my waist, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the heat of her palm. You know how I knew? I shook my head, unable to speak. You never talk about the sound, she explained, her eyes tracking over my face. You talk about the cover art. You talk about the liner notes. You talk about the history of the band. But you never once mentioned the warmth of the bass or the crackle of the needle. You treat the records like artifacts, not instruments. I thought I was being convincing, I whispered, feeling ridiculous. You were adorable, she corrected, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. But you were obvious, at least to me. The shame of it was a sharp, hot spike. I had been performing a play for an audience of 1, and she had seen the wires the entire time. So you knew, I said, my voice gaining a little strength. You knew for months, and you let me keep buying them? You let me spend hundreds of dollars on plastic circles I can't use. I did, she agreed unapologetically. Why? I demanded. If you knew I was a fraud, why didn't you call me out? Why did you play along? She moved then, closing the final inch of distance between us. She placed one hand on the shelf beside my head, boxing me in. The smell of sandalwood and rain was overwhelming now, a sensory tide rising to drown me. Why do you think? She asked softly. Why would you come here every single day at 4:15 p.m. to buy something you don't need? You know why, I breathed. Say it, she commanded. Her gaze dropped to my mouth, then back to my eyes. It was a dare. Tell me why you have a stack of unplayed vinyl in your apartment. I didn't come for the vinyl, I confessed, the truth tearing its way out of my throat. I never cared about the music. I came for the way you look when you clean them. I came for the way your voice sounds when you talk about jazz. I came for the conductor, Samira, not the orchestra. The admission hung between us, raw and terrifying. I had laid it all out. I was stripped bare. Samira stared at me, her pupils blown so wide, her eyes looked black. She didn't pull away. She didn't laugh. She leaned in, her forehead resting against mine, her breath warm against my cheek. And I kept selling them to you, she whispered, her voice rough with emotion. Because it was the only way I could keep you here. It was the price of admission. As long as you were buying, you had a reason to stay. And I wanted you to stay. My heart stopped, then restarted with a violent kick. I knew you were lying, she murmured, her hand moving from the shelf to cup my jaw, her thumb tracing the line of my cheekbone. And I loved it. Every time you walked in with that terrified look in your eyes, pretending to need a synth pop album. It was the highlight of my day. It was a game, and I didn't want the game to end. It wasn't a game to me, I said, leaning into her touch. It was torture. It was foreplay, she countered, her thumb brushing over my lower lip, dragging it down slightly. It was months of us dancing around the fact that the only thing in this shop I wanted you to take home was me. The air in the back room crackled, charged with the inevitable. The lie was dead. The transaction was over. There was nothing left between us but the heat and the rain and the truth. So, she whispered, her face so close our noses brushed. No more records. No more excuses. What are you here for now? You, I said. Just you. Good, she breathed. The single word dissolved the last barrier between us. The space that had been a minefield of unsaid things for half a year finally vanished. Her other hand came up, sliding around my waist, pulling me away from the shelf and into the solid, undeniable reality of her body. The impact was soft but heavy, a collision of intent. I felt the heat of her through her clothes, a radiating warmth that seemed to seep straight into my bones, chasing away the damp chill of the storm. Her thumb brushed my cheekbone again, a slow, possessive stroke that felt like she was signing her name on my skin. I'm going to kiss you now, she whispered, her eyes searching mine, dark and dilated in the shadows. And I'm not going to rush it. We've rushed enough things. I'm not going anywhere, I managed to say, my hands finding purchase on her waist, gripping the fabric of her shirt. I'm right here. I know. When her mouth finally met mine, it wasn't an explosion. It was a deepening. It was the needle finally finding the groove after skipping across the surface for months. It tasted of peppermint tea and the sharp, electric charge of adrenaline. It was slow, deliberate, and utterly consuming. She kissed with the same terrifying competence she applied to everything else, focused, thorough, and demanding a response. I melted into it. The tension that had been holding my spine straight, the anxiety that had kept me rigid, it all dissolved, leaving me fluid and shaking against her. I made a sound, a low, desperate noise in the back of my throat, and she hummed in response, the vibration buzzing against my lips. Her hands moved, sliding up my back, fingers tangling in my hair, tilting my head back to deepen the angle. It felt like drowning in the best possible way. The smell of the shop, the dust, the vinyl, the rain, faded until there was only the scent of her skin, filling my senses, rewriting my memory. We broke apart for air, but barely. Our foreheads rested together, a bridge between two minds that were finally quiet. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and I could feel hers answering, a syncopated beat where our chests pressed together. "You have no idea," I whispered, my eyes still closed. "How many times I've watched your hands and imagined this." "I have an idea," she murmured, her breath warm on my face. She brought her hands down to rest on my shoulders, her grip grounding, heavy. "Because I've been watching you watch me. You have a terrible poker face." "I wasn't trying to hide it." "You were trying to survive it," she corrected softly. "So was I." She pulled me into a hug then, burying her face in the crook of my neck. It wasn't sexual. It was foundational. It was the feeling of being anchored. I wrapped my arms around her, squeezing tight, feeling the solid reality of her spine, the rise and fall of her breathing. I felt sutured to her, the static in my head finally replaced by a clear, resonant signal. The storm outside could rage all night. I had found the eye of the hurricane. We stood there in the narrow aisle of the back room, surrounded by towers of silence, while the rain lashed against the roof. "Your patience," she whispered against the skin of my neck, sending a shiver down my spine. It drove me crazy. It was so controlled. "It wasn't patience," I admitted, running my hands down her back. "It was fear. I was terrified I'd break the spell." "The spell isn't broken," she promised, pulling back just enough to look at me, her gaze heavy and sultry. "It's just real now." I still walk through that door every day at 4:15. The smell of ozone and old paper still hits me, but I don't browse the shelves anymore. I walk straight to the counter, hop up on the stool she keeps back there now, and watch her work. The collection in my apartment has stopped growing. I don't need the physical receipts anymore. I have the music. If you've ever found a rhythm you didn't expect, subscribe for the next track.